All right, first things first, let's get rid of all of these books. Ugh. All right, now that we have that out of the way, we can get started. So that's honestly step number one to applying everything that we read, is to cut all of that out and focus on things that you actually want to apply. Think about how much different your life would be if you could actually apply everything that you read to your daily life. The secret lies in something that Elon Musk said about the brain, which is that it's an information filtering system. Basically what that means is that there's so much information coming at us on a day-to-day basis, sensations, advertisements, things that we just don't need to remember in order to reach our goals, that the brain has to somehow decide subconsciously what to remember and what to put aside. So first, forgive yourself for not applying everything that you read. We're not supposed to remember everything that we consume, only the most important things. So how do we decide what's most important? If you're new here, my name is Damien. I have a marketing technology company that does 7 figures per year, and I'm working to build that up into 8 figures. I've also trained and done a half Ironman, and I'm working to make that a full Ironman. On this channel, I share the journey on making both of those happen. This video, I'm gonna break down my information filtering framework for applying everything that I read. I categorize the information that I'm consuming in order to help me reach my goals into 3 categories. Each of those different categories serves a different purpose when it comes to applying the things that I consume. So the first category are goals. These are the information sources that help me decide what goals I'd actually like to pursue. Number 2 are strategies. These are the sources of information that help me decide what to work on. And number 3 are the actual tactics, which help me decide on what are the habits, checklists, and actual activities that I should be focusing on in order to achieve the goals that I've decided to pursue. The first semester of my junior year, when I was at the University of Michigan Business School, I remember every day the teacher at the front of the class would stand up and I would be sitting there listening to all of the companies that were recruiting for the day. Companies like American Express, Goldman Sachs, Deloitte, they would announce the companies and the recruiting events and the schedule, and everyone there was taking notes, making sure that they were hitting those events that they wanted to hit in order to get the internship, the prestigious internships in finance, investment banking, consulting, all of those things that the business school was funneling into. And I remember sitting there and everyone around me had their nice business clothes on, you know, the suit and tie, to go out and recruit and just talk to people who are already working for the company. It was later that day, I went to the Goldman Sachs recruiting event, and there were probably 200 people at this event, all going for the same 5 to 10 positions at Goldman Sachs. Goldman had like 5 recruiters there, and the room was filled with business school students. At the end of the Goldman Sachs presentation, the recruiters were swarmed, and there was probably 30 business school students all gathered around each of the recruiters. And I was sitting in the back just thinking, oh my God, like how am I going to stand out in this pool of people all gunning for the same job? Eventually, after sitting there for a couple of hours, I maybe said 5 words to a recruiter, and I figured there's no way I was going to stand out. And it really made me question, why do I even want this job anyway? It was just something that was given to you because everyone else was doing it. It was kind of like I was on autopilot, accepting the default of what everyone else around me was doing. That ended up being the first and the last recruiting event I ever went to. And looking back and talking to the people who ended up getting these jobs, a lot of them a couple of years later just left because they realized the same thing that I had realized, which is they really weren't that interested in this job to begin with. It was just a goal that was given to them by society, by the culture that they were surrounded by. And that's when I realized the importance of being intentional about the goals that we set for ourselves. I didn't want to just accept the goals that society placed in front of me. I wanted to make sure that those goals were aligned with the values and the life that I wanted to live. And that brings me to the first category of information that I consume. Those are things like biographies, inspirational stories of startup founders, and really just stories of people in general who've done interesting things with their lives. It serves as a source of inspiration, and reading biographies or autobiographies of these people allow you to walk in their shoes for a little bit and decide if you actually want to go down that path. Some of the first biographies that I read when I was starting out was Shoe Dog by Phil Knight, the Edison biography by Walter Isaacson, and Total Recall, which is Arnold Schwarzenegger's autobiography. All of those books and more helped me to realize that I could do things outside of what was normal in the environment that I was surrounding myself in. So I would take those stories stories of people who were doing interesting things and apply it to my own life to set the goals that were actually aligned with what I wanted. Another quote that comes to mind that's similar to this is by Ray Dalio, who's a billionaire hedge fund manager. He wrote the book Principles, which again, I highly recommend that book. It's that if you know how to achieve the goal, then you're setting the bar way too low. When you're thinking about the goals, you don't necessarily have to know how to achieve it. That will come as you take the steps to get there along the way. Just make sure that the goal that you set is directionally aligned with where you want your life to end up in, say, 10 to 20, 30 years down the line. Obviously, you're not gonna know exactly what you want, but just as long as it's aligned directionally with the values that you hold for yourself, you'll be well on your way. Once you have your clear goal, then you can start to filter those sources of information, actually help you to achieve that goal you've set. And who you listen to is super important. I had an internship in the purchasing department of an automotive company in the Detroit area my sophomore year. And I remember one day the CEO came in and talked to all of the interns. He was in his late 50s making $10 million per year. By all metrics, he was a very successful guy. And we had a question and answer session with all of the interns in the company that year where we could ask him anything that we wanted. So I asked him, what advice would you have to someone just starting out looking to be successful in the company? His advice was based on his own experience of treating every day in his job as if he was owning the company himself. What that allowed him to do was change his perspective of the whole business. He would be super curious about all of these different areas, and that allowed him over the course of several decades in this company to eventually move from intern to associate all the way up the ladder until he was a CEO where he is right now. It was great advice, but the only problem was where he was not where I wanted to be. It was not aligned with the goals I had set for myself. There are a lot of strategies and information out there, but the biggest thing that's going to allow you to filter that information down into actionable things that you can do is to have a clear goal and listen to those people who've achieved the goal themselves. So instead of listening to a $10 million CEO who spent 30 years to get there, I wanted to listen to someone who'd built a $10 million company, a $100 million company themselves from the ground up, because that was a goal that I'd set for myself. I could easily have followed his advice, but his advice was based on the actions that he took to get where he was, which is a CEO of a company after 30 years. But I wanted to be an entrepreneur and build this big company myself, which was not aligned with what he had achieved. So making that distinction instantly allowed me to cut down on the information that I was consuming to only come from those people who had done what I wanted to do myself. Now I could pick up a book or a podcast, do some research if that person had achieved what I wanted, and then only listen and apply those things that they recommended. It's kind of like if you want to bake a key lime pie versus an apple pie. The type of pie that you're trying to bake is going to determine the recipe that you follow. It's the same thing with your own goals. So once you've set the clear goal and you found a person with the recipe, then you need to follow those steps in order. One of the biggest mistakes I made was reading about the strategies of these huge companies like Good to Great, or all of these books on leadership, like the ones by Jocko Willink or John C. Maxwell. Those were great pieces of information. The only problem was I had one client at the time and I didn't have anyone to lead. So reading a book about leadership was not really helping me get to the next step. That was maybe step 6. I was still at step 1 of my journey. So it's important to follow the steps in order. Figure out what the people were doing when they were in your shoes and work forwards from there, as opposed to just trying to take it all in at once. And that leads me to the third category of information that I consume, which is more about the tactics. Back to the pie analogy. Let's say we're trying to make an apple pie and we're gonna go to step 1. The first thing I'd probably have to do is slice the apples. If I didn't know how to slice the apples, then I'd go figure out online and specifically search for how to slice apples. And it's the same thing with all of the other information you're trying to consume to reach your goals. Once you have the roadmap, you know the different steps and how they all fit together, you want to hone in on getting the first thing done, which is the actual skill of slicing an apple or taking a sales call, doing those first steps that are going to get you to the next step so you can continue to bake that cake. There are 3 tools that I use to consistently apply the tactics that I'm learning, like slicing an apple or taking a sales call or doing some Facebook ads, those little things that add up to get to the goal. Number 1 is a checklist. Charlie Munger had this saying, it went along the lines of, no good pilot, no matter his skills, fails to use his checklist. Surgeons also, despite being one of the most highly skilled professionals and highly trained professionals, never fail to use their checklist when they're actually in the operating room. Basically, what these two examples are saying is it's easy, really easy to forget exactly what those steps are and the things that we learned, especially on the tactical level, until we've made them a habit. So what I do is, as I'm reading, I'll write down on a piece of paper the checklist. I'll read a book about copywriting and write down the 7 principles of copy that I want to apply in every single ad that I've done. I'll save it on my computer, and every time I pull out my notebook to write an ad, I'll also bring out my checklist and make sure I'm hitting each point as I write this ad. The second tool that I use is a calendar, and this really helps to build systems when the things that we're doing are not on a daily basis. So if I want to do something on a weekly basis every day on Monday, I'll make sure that that item is in my calendar every single Monday, so I can just pull out my calendar and remember. It's kind of like a checklist, but on a week-to-week basis. And then the final step is playbook. So while I'm doing something, I'll record everything that I'm doing as I'm going through the checklist. I'll use my phone or a screen recording software on the computer like Loom, and I will go through all the different steps that I've done. And what that allows me to do is, once I've finished a specific task, I can take that playbook and the whole system around how to write a Facebook ad, launch a new campaign, take a sales call, and hand that off to someone else, and they can just follow the checklist in the same way that I did and really duplicate the result. It's the same thing like the recipe example. Once you have the recipe down in the form of step 1, step 2, step 3, anyone can follow that recipe and end up with a perfectly made apple pie. So those are my 3 steps. First, you set a goal that aligns with the values, then you figure out what to do, then you figure out how to do it. Once you achieve that goal, then you go on repeat. For me, last year, I ran a half Ironman and I built my company to 7 figures in revenue. This year going forward, my new goal is to build a company to 8 figures in revenue and finish a full Ironman. Once I've completed those, then I'll continue to push my goals further and I'll repeat the process. If you're interested in hearing my exact strategy for how I organize my calendar, you can click this video here, and I'll see you guys in the next one.